The second story I'd like to tell you is slightly different, because Indonesia was a country that needed money, so we could work that particular kind of deal in Indonesia. But the next story is about Saudi Arabia, which didn't need money. And in the early 70s, OPEC struck the United States pretty hard because of the rebelling against our outrageous policies with Israel, and had an oil embargo, which really brought us to our knees in the United States. The U.S. State Department came to me, the head of the Treasury Department came to me and a few other economic hitmen and said, hey, you know, we can't ever let this happen again. We can't be blackmailed by OPEC. Do something. Well, we knew that the something to do had to deal with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia essentially controlled OPEC in those days. And we also knew that the House of Saud was very corrupt and very corruptible. And so I went off to Saudi Arabia with these other people, and to make a long story short, we struck this amazing deal with the House of Saud. And the deal basically went like this. It's a long deal, but to make it short, and it's described in detail in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's called the Saudi Arabia money laundering deal. And it went something like this, that we get Saudi Arabia to agree that it would always cooperate, and OPEC would cooperate with the big oil companies in setting oil prices, so they would work together, and they would never set a price that the oil companies weren't happy with. Not the customers, but the oil companies. And two, that they would only, and this is a very important one, wait, before I move into that one, the second one was that they would return most of the money they made by selling oil to the world to the U.S. Treasury Department by buying treasury bonds. And the interest from those bonds, Saudi Arabia would still own the bonds, but the interest would go to the U.S. Treasury Department to hire consulting firms to westernize Saudi Arabia, to build desalination plants and oil refineries and cities out of the desert, to westernize Saudi Arabia. And in fact, that's happened. Trillions of dollars have gone through this system. And the third point was, and this is a very important one, because Nixon had just taken the dollar off the gold standard. And so the dollar was floating around out there. Nobody was quite sure what was going to happen. So the demand was made that OPEC would agree to never sell oil for anything but US dollars, which essentially put the dollar on the oil standard, which of course has been one of the problems when anybody's objected to that, like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or the Iranians. We go after them because we're very protective of the US Federal Reserve and of the dollar. So we struck this deal with the House of Saud, and our end of the deal was, as long as you keep this deal, you're part of the deal, we'll protect you. We'll keep you in power. And we've done that. And so those are just two examples of the world that I was living in back in the 70s.